In a quiet little town where everyone knew each other's names, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with old brick buildings, some vibrant with fresh paint, while others wore the scars of time: cracked walls, faded signs, and boarded-up windows. Among these forgotten structures stood an abandoned factory on the edge of town. It had been empty for years, a shadow of its former self. But recently, it became the center of attention for reasons no one expected. 17-year-old Ethan Carter lived just 2 blocks away from the factory. He was a shy boy, often overlooked in class and rarely noticed in social circles. With messy brown hair that always seemed to fall into his eyes and clothes that never quite fit right, Ethan blended into the background like wallpaper. But beneath his unassuming exterior lay a mind full of thoughts, dreams, and frustrations he struggled to express aloud. Art had always been his escape, a way to channel his emotions when words failed him. Whether it was sketching in notebooks or doodling on scraps of paper, Ethan poured his heart into creating something meaningful. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Ethan found himself standing outside the old factory. The building loomed before him, dark and silent yet strangely inviting. Its broken windows stared back like hollow eyes, and the graffiti already scrawled across its walls told stories of neglect and rebellion. For weeks Ethan had felt drawn to this place, not because of its decay but because it symbolized something bigger, the parts of society people chose to ignore. That night, armed with spray cans borrowed from a friend, Ethan decided to make his mark, not out of anger or mischief but as a form of protest. He climbed over the rusted fence surrounding the property and began painting. His hands trembled at first, unsure if anyone would understand what he was trying to say. But as the colors came together under the dim glow of the streetlights, his confidence grew. By morning, the side of the factory was transformed into a mural depicting a tree sprouting from cracked concrete, its branches stretching toward the sky. Beneath it, Ethan had written in bold letters, "Growth starts where you least expect it." At first, no one paid much attention to the new artwork. A few passers-by glanced at it curiously, wondering who had left their mark on the forgotten building. Some admired the creativity, while others dismissed it as another act of vandalism. Then, 3 days later, everything changed. A local business owner reported the graffiti to the authorities, claiming it devalued the neighborhood. When the police investigated, they discovered security footage showing Ethan sneaking onto the property late at night. Within hours, officers arrived at his doorstep asking questions and taking notes. Ethan's parents were shocked when they learned what he'd done. His mother, a soft-spoken woman who worked long hours at the diner downtown, sat him down at the kitchen table. "Ethan," she said gently, "why would you do something like this? You know better than to break the law." Her voice wavered between concern and disappointment. Ethan tried to explain, mumbling about how the mural wasn't meant to hurt anyone. It was supposed to send a message. But his words tumbled out awkwardly, failing to convey the depth of his intentions. His father, a man of few words, simply shook his head and muttered, "This is going to cost us." The next day, Ethan received a summons ordering him to appear in court. Panic set in as he read the official document. He had heard stories about Judge Margaret Hargrove, a formidable figure known for her strict rulings and sharp tongue. She didn't tolerate excuses, especially from teenagers who thought they were above the rules. As the date approached, Ethan couldn't shake the knot forming in his stomach. What if she didn't listen? What if she saw him as nothing more than a troublemaker? On the morning of the hearing, Ethan dressed carefully, choosing his least-worn jeans and a clean button-up shirt that belonged to his dad. Despite his efforts, he still looked out of place as he entered the courthouse, clutching the crumpled summons in sweaty palms. The building smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, and the echoing footsteps of strangers made him feel even smaller. He took a seat on a hard wooden bench outside the courtroom, trying to steady his breathing. Every creak of the floorboards and shuffle of papers sent his nerves spiraling. Beside him sat his public defender, a kind-eyed woman named Ms. Alvarez, who had agreed to represent him pro bono. She flipped through the case file, occasionally offering reassuring smiles. "Just remember," she whispered, "stick to the truth. Be honest and don't let her intimidate you." Ethan nodded, though he doubted he could stay calm once Judge Hargrove started questioning him. His mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Would she yell at him? Throw him in jail? Ruin his future? Finally, the bailiff called his name, and Ethan's legs felt like jelly as he stood up. The heavy door to the courtroom creaked open, revealing rows of benches filled with curious onlookers. At the front sat Judge Hargrove, her expression unreadable behind a pair of thin-rimmed glasses. Her gavel rested ominously on the desk in front of her, a silent reminder of her authority. As Ethan approached the stand, his heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading. Whatever happened next would change everything. The courtroom buzzed with a tense energy as Ethan shuffled to the stand, his sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished floor. Every step felt heavier than the last, and by the time he reached the witness box, his hands were trembling so much that he had to clasp them together to keep them still. The judge's gaze followed him like a hawk watching its prey, sharp and unyielding. Her presence filled the room, making it hard for anyone, let alone a nervous teenager, to feel at ease. "State your name for the record," Judge Margaret Hargrove instructed, her voice firm but not yet harsh. She adjusted her glasses, leaning slightly forward as if ready to pounce on any misstep. "Ethan Carter," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again, this time louder, but still shaky. "Ethan Carter." Judge Hargrove nodded once, jotting something down in her notebook before fixing her attention fully on him. "Mr. Carter," she began, her tone clipped and professional. "You are here today because you have been charged with vandalism. Specifically, defacing public property without permission. Do you understand the nature of these charges?" Ethan swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "Yes, Your Honor." His words came out rushed, almost tripping over themselves. He glanced toward Ms. Alvarez, who gave him an encouraging nod from her seat nearby. It was a small gesture, but it reminded him that he wasn't entirely alone in this daunting situation. "Good," Judge Hargrove continued, flipping through the documents in front of her. "Now let's talk about why we're here. According to the report, you spray-painted a mural on the side of an abandoned factory. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied, his voice steadier now. For a brief moment he thought about explaining the meaning behind the mural, the tree breaking through concrete, the message of hope. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he simply added, "I didn't mean to cause trouble." The judge raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "Didn't mean to cause trouble?" she repeated slowly, as if weighing each word. "Then perhaps you can explain what exactly you did intend to do, Mr. Carter. Because from where I'm sitting, painting someone else's property without consent looks a lot like causing trouble." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in the witness box, his palms slick with sweat. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. His mind raced, searching for the right words to make her understand. But every sentence he formed in his head sounded clumsy or defensive, and the weight of the judge's stare only made things worse. "Well?" Judge Hargrove prompted, tapping her pen impatiently against the desk. "I'm waiting. I just wanted people to see it," Ethan blurted out finally, his voice rising in desperation. "The building, it's been there forever, rotting away, and nobody cares about it anymore. I thought maybe if I did something creative, people would notice. Maybe they'd think about how places like that could be fixed instead of ignored." There was a pause, and for a split second Ethan dared to hope that his explanation might resonate with her. But then Judge Hargrove sighed deeply, setting her pen down with a soft click. "Creative?" she echoed, her tone laced with skepticism. "Mr. Carter, let's be clear about one thing. Graffiti is not art. It's destruction. You may have had good intentions, but good intentions don't erase the fact that you broke the law. That building belongs to someone, whether it's being used or not, and altering it without permission is illegal." Her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He felt his cheeks burning, embarrassment mixing with frustration as the murmurs of the spectators behind him grew louder. Some nodded in agreement with the judge, while others whispered amongst themselves, their opinions unclear. Ethan clenched, his fists tightly, trying to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Do you realize the consequences of your actions?" Judge Hargrove pressed, her voice growing colder with each passing moment. "This isn't some abstract concept, Mr. Carter. What you did has real-world implications. Property owners lose value when their buildings are vandalized. Taxpayers foot the bill for cleanup costs. And most importantly, young men like yourself learn that breaking rules has no repercussions. Is that the kind of lesson you want to take away from this experience?" Ethan stared at the floor, unable to meet her piercing gaze. Each accusation felt like another brick added to the wall of guilt pressing down on him. He knew she wasn't wrong. What he'd done had consequences, even if he hadn't intended them. But hearing her lay it all out so bluntly made him feel smaller than ever. I'm sorry," he managed to say, his voice cracking under the pressure. "I didn't think about all that. I wanted to make a difference." "A difference," Judge Hargrove repeated dryly, arching an eyebrow. "And how exactly does defacing property make a difference, Mr. Cord? Did you stop to consider the impact on the community? Or were you too focused on making a statement to care about the fallout?" Ethan flinched at her pointed question, feeling cornered and powerless. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that his intentions weren't selfish or reckless, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he stood there silently, his shoulders slumped in defeat as the judge continued her interrogation. "You're lucky this case isn't more severe," she said after a moment, her tone softer but still stern. "Vandalism is a misdemeanor, but it's still a crime, and crimes carry penalties. If you're truly sorry, Mr. Carter, you'll accept responsibility for your actions and work to make amends. Anything less would be unacceptable." As the judge spoke, Ethan's mind spun with conflicting thoughts. On one hand, he understood her perspective. He'd acted impulsively, without fully considering the broader implications of his choices. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that she, and everyone else in the room, was missing the point. His mural wasn't just random scribbles, it represented something deeper, something personal. Yet no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find the courage to articulate that in front of such a critical audience. When Judge Hargrove finally leaned back in her chair, signaling the end of her questioning, Ethan exhaled a shaky breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The tension in the courtroom lingered, thick and suffocating, as the judge turned to confer quietly with the prosecutor. Ethan glanced toward Ms. Alvarez, who offered him a sympathetic smile, though it did little to ease his anxiety. For what felt like an eternity, the room remained silent except for the faint rustling of papers and the occasional cough from the gallery. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears like a drum roll leading up to an inevitable verdict. Whatever happened next, he knew, would define not only his immediate future, but also how he viewed himself moving forward. As the courtroom fell into a brief lull, Ethan felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room fixed on him. The silence was deafening, pressing down on his shoulders like an invisible force. His hands gripped the edge of the witness stand so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He tried to steady his breathing, but it came in shallow bursts, each inhale feeling more labored than the last. Judge Hargrove's words still hung heavy in the air, sharp and unrelenting, leaving little room for him to maneuver. Inside, Ethan wrestled with a storm of emotions, shame, frustration, and a flicker of anger that surprised even himself. He wasn't angry at the judge, though her sternness made it hard to think clearly. No, he was angry at the situation, at how helpless he felt trying to explain something so personal in front of people who seemed determined to misunderstand him. Every attempt to speak had been met with skepticism, as if his intentions didn't matter because they didn't fit neatly into the box of right or wrong. Ms. Alvarez leaned forward slightly from her seat, giving him another subtle nod of encouragement, but even her kindness couldn't fully calm the turmoil brewing inside him. Ethan glanced around the courtroom, taking in the faces of the spectators. Some looked sympathetic, their expressions soft and contemplative. Others wore masks of disapproval, shaking their heads or whispering behind cupped hands, It was impossible to tell whose side anyone was on, or if anyone truly cared about what he was trying to say. The judge broke the silence first, addressing the prosecutor beside her. "Do you have anything further to add?" she asked, her tone clipped and businesslike. The prosecutor shook his head, signaling that he had no additional questions. Judge Hargrove nodded once, then turned her attention back to Ethan. "Very well," she said, folding her hands on the desk in front of her. "Mr. Carter, do you have anything else you'd like to say before we proceed?" Ethan froze. The question caught him off guard, pulling him out of his spiraling thoughts and forcing him to confront the moment head-on. Did he have anything else to say? Of course he did. But would it make a difference? Would anyone listen? For a fleeting second he considered staying quiet, letting the proceedings move forward without another word. After all, everything he'd said so far had only dug him deeper into trouble. But then something inside him shifted, a spark of defiance igniting in the pit of his stomach. He thought about the mural he'd painted, the hours he'd spent under, the cover of darkness pouring his heart into every stroke of color. He thought about the tree breaking through concrete, symbolizing resilience and growth against all odds. And he thought about the countless times he'd felt ignored or dismissed, not just by adults, but by society as a whole. If he stayed silent, now he realized he'd be letting them win, not just the judge or the prosecutor, but the system that often overlooked kids like him. Taking a deep breath, Ethan straightened his posture and lifted his chin. His voice trembled when he began speaking, but he pushed through the nerves. "Your Honor," he started, his tone hesitant but earnest. "I know I messed up. I shouldn't have gone onto that property without permission, and I understand why. What I did is considered vandalism, but I need you to know, it wasn't just random graffiti, it meant something to me." Judge Hargrove tilted her head slightly, studying him with an unreadable expression. She didn't interrupt, which gave Ethan the courage to continue. "That building has been sitting there for years, falling apart, and nobody does anything about it. It's like everyone pretends it doesn't exist, but I see it every day, and I wanted to show people that even something broken can be beautiful again. That's why I painted the tree. Trees grow where nothing else can survive. They remind us that change is possible, even in places where it seems hopeless." His words spilled out faster now, tumbling over one another in his urgency to be heard. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone or cause problems. I just wanted someone to notice, to really see what's happening in our town. Kids like me, we feel invisible sometimes. Like no one cares what we think or how we feel. Maybe painting that mural wasn't the right way to get my point across, but I don't regret wanting to make a difference." There was a collective intake of breath in the courtroom as Ethan finished speaking. Even the judge seemed momentarily taken aback, her usual composure faltering ever so slightly. Her pen hovered above her notebook, poised midair, as if she were processing not just his words but the raw emotion behind them. For a moment no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then, slowly, Judge Hargrove set her pen down and leaned back in her chair. Her expression softened, though her gaze remained piercing. "You seem awfully passionate about this message of yours, Mr. Carter," she said finally, her tone less harsh than before. "Tell me, what exactly were you hoping to achieve with this mural? What kind of difference did you want to make?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard by her unexpected curiosity. For the first time since stepping into the courtroom, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she was listening. Maybe she actually cared. Summoning what little confidence he had left, he took a step forward, not physically but emotionally, and dove deeper into his explanation. "I guess I wanted people to stop looking away," he admitted, his voice growing steadier. "We walk past things like that factory every day, but we don't really see them. We don't see the potential in them, or in ourselves. I wanted to remind people that beauty can come from brokenness, that we shouldn't give up on places or people that seem lost. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person to believe in something, to make others start believing too." As he spoke, Ethan noticed a shift in the atmosphere of the room. Some of the spectators exchanged glances. their earlier skepticism giving way to thoughtful consideration. A few nodded subtly, as if acknowledging the truth in his words. Even Ms. Alvarez smiled faintly, her eyes shining with pride. For the first time that day, Ethan felt like he was being seen, not as a troublemaker or a criminal, but as someone with ideas worth hearing. Judge Hargrove listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. When Ethan finally trailed off, unsure of what else to say, she sat quietly for several long seconds. The silence stretched on, heavy with anticipation. Then, with deliberate slowness, she removed her glasses and rubbed her temples, as if weighing the gravity of the situation. "You've given me a lot to think about, Mr. Carter," she said at last, her voice softer, but still authoritative. "While your methods are unacceptable and potentially dangerous, they stem from a place of genuine concern. That's rare these days, especially among young people. Perhaps—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Perhaps we've failed you, and others like you, by not providing better outlets for your creativity, by not listening when you try to speak." Her admission sent ripples through the courtroom, drawing murmurs of surprise from the gallery. Ethan stood frozen, unsure of what to make of her sudden change in tone. Was she actually considering his perspective, or was this just another tactic to make him lower his guard? Before he could dwell on it too much, Judge Hargrove continued, "This case isn't black and white, Mr. Carter. While I cannot condone your actions, neither can I ignore the underlying message you're trying to convey. Society often overlooks voices like yours, dismissing them as naive or misguided. But sometimes those voices hold truths we desperately need to hear." Ethan's heart raced as he processed her words. Could it be possible that she understood? That she saw beyond the surface-level act of vandalism to the deeper meaning behind it? Hope swelled within him, fragile but undeniable, as he waited to hear what she would say next. The judge reached for her gavel, tapping it lightly against the desk to regain order in the room. "Let's take a short recess," she announced, rising from her seat. "I'll return shortly with my decision." With that, she disappeared through a side door, leaving the courtroom buzzing with speculation. Ethan sank back into the witness stand, overwhelmed by the whirlwind of emotions coursing through him. Relief, fear, excitement. They all mingled, together, making it hard to focus on any one feeling. One thing was certain, though. Whatever happened next, he had spoken his truth, and for the first time in a long while he felt proud of himself, not for what he'd done, but for having the courage to stand up and be heard. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as Judge Hargrove stepped out for the recess. Ethan remained seated in the witness stand, his mind racing faster than ever before. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him. He'd bared his soul to a room full of strangers, including a judge known for her sternness. Now, all he could do was wait and wonder whether his words had made any impact at all. Ms. Alvarez approached him cautiously, her face betraying a mix of cautious optimism and professional restraint. "You did well, Ethan," she said softly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Whatever happens next, remember that you stood up for yourself. That's important." Ethan nodded but didn't respond. His thoughts were elsewhere, on the mural, on the factory, on the countless times he'd felt invisible growing up. He replayed every word he'd spoken to Judge Hargrove, analyzing them for flaws or missteps. Had he sounded convincing? Or had his explanation come across as naive and childish? The uncertainty gnawed at him, making it hard to sit still. Meanwhile, the gallery erupted into hushed conversations. Some spectators whispered about how brave Ethan seemed, while others dismissed his defense as nothing more than an attempt to justify bad behavior. A few people exchanged knowing looks, nodding in agreement when someone suggested that kids these days lack discipline. Ethan tried not to let their opinions affect him, but it was impossible not to notice the divided reactions around him as the minutes ticked by. The tension in the room grew thicker. Every creak of the door made everyone turn their heads, expecting Judge Hargrove's return. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the side door opened and she re-entered the courtroom. Her expression was unreadable as she took her seat, adjusting her glasses and shuffling through papers. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a gravity that silenced even the faintest whispers. "Court is back in session," she announced, tapping her gavel once for emphasis. She looked directly at Ethan, who instinctively sat up straighter, bracing himself for whatever verdict awaited him. "Mr. Carter," she began, her tone measured and deliberate, "I've given your case considerable thought during this recess. What you've done is undeniably illegal. Vandalism is a serious offense, and it cannot be excused simply because of good intentions." Ethan's heart sank. He'd hoped, perhaps foolishly, that his explanation might sway her decision. But now, hearing her confirm the severity of his actions, he prepared himself for the worst. Maybe she'd impose a hefty fine, or worse, order community service hours so grueling they'd feel like punishment rather than rehabilitation. Either way, he knew there would be consequences. However, Judge Hargrove wasn't finished speaking. That said, she continued, pausing to glance at the notes in front of her, "Your message resonated with me. You spoke passionately about wanting to bring attention to neglected spaces and giving a voice to those who feel overlooked. These are noble aspirations, even if your methods were misguided." Her words caught Ethan off guard. For the first time since entering the courtroom, he allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. Was she actually considering leniency? Or was this just another setup leading to a harsher than expected sentence? "In light of your sincerity and your willingness to take responsibility for your actions, I've decided to approach this matter differently," Judge Hargrove explained. "Instead of imposing a standard penalty, I'm assigning you to complete 40 hours of community service. However, this won't involve picking up trash along highways or scrubbing graffiti off walls." She paused, letting her statement sink in before delivering the surprising twist. "You will work under the supervision of local artists to create murals in approved public spaces throughout our town. Your goal will be to transform areas that need revitalization, not destroy or deface them." The courtroom erupted into murmurs of surprise. Spectators exchanged glances, some nodding approvingly while others frowned in confusion. Even Ms. Alvarez raised her eyebrows, clearly impressed by the judge's unconventional ruling. Ethan, meanwhile, sat stunned, unable to process what he'd just heard. Community service on painting murals? It sounded almost too good to be true. Judge Hargrove leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing yet oddly kind. "This arrangement serves two purposes, Mr. Carter. First, it allows you to channel your creativity into something constructive, benefiting both you and the community. Second, it gives you an opportunity to demonstrate accountability while showcasing your talent. If you succeed, you'll prove that art can indeed inspire change without breaking laws. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat and repeated himself louder, determination replacing the earlier nerves. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." The judge nodded once, satisfied with his response. "Very well. This court expects regular updates on your progress, and failure to comply with these terms will result in stricter penalties. Are we clear?" "We're clear, Your Honor," Ethan said firmly, meeting her gaze for the first time without flinching. With that, Judge Hargrove tapped her gavel again, signaling the end of the hearing. As the courtroom began to empty, Ethan felt a rush of emotions: relief, gratitude, and a newfound sense of purpose. He turned to Ms. Alvarez, who smiled warmly and patted him on the back. "You handled that beautifully, Ethan. Now it's time to show everyone what you're capable of." Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun bathed the streets in golden light. Ethan squinted against the brightness, feeling as though he'd stepped into a different world. Gone was the suffocating anxiety that had plagued him for weeks. In its place was a spark of excitement. For the first time in ages, he felt hopeful. Not just about avoiding trouble, but about using his art to make a real difference. Over the next few days, Ethan threw himself into planning his community service project. Local artists reached out to collaborate, offering guidance and support. Town officials identified several neglected areas: a rundown park bench, a crumbling brick wall near the library, and even the side of an old fire station that could use fresh paint and new life. Ethan sketched ideas furiously, imagining vibrant, designs that reflected themes of growth, resilience, and unity. Word of his assignment spread quickly through town, drawing mixed reactions. Some residents applauded the initiative, praising Ethan for turning a mistake into an opportunity. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether a teenager could truly deliver meaningful results. But Ethan didn't let the criticism deter him. Instead, he used it as fuel to work harder, determined to prove the naysayers wrong. On the morning of his first official day of service, Ethan arrived at the designated site armed with brushes, rollers, and cans of paint. A small crowd had gathered, curious to see what he'd create. Among them was Judge Hargrove herself, standing quietly at the edge of the group. When Ethan spotted her, he hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. But she merely nodded encouragingly, her expression softer than he'd ever seen it. "You've got this, Mr. Carter," she said simply before stepping back to observe. Ethan took a deep breath and dipped his brush into the paint. As he began working, he realized something profound. This wasn't just about fixing mistakes or fulfilling a court order. It was about proving, to himself, to the judge, and to the entire town, that beauty could rise from brokenness, just like the tree in his original mural. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan believed wholeheartedly that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The weeks that followed the court hearing were a whirlwind of activity for Ethan. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities, as he threw himself into his community service project with an energy he hadn't felt in years. The once nervous teenager who had fidgeted under Judge Hargrove's gaze was slowly transforming into someone more confident, more determined. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration, exhaustion, and self-doubt, but every stroke of paint on the walls seemed to chip away at the weight of his past mistakes. Ethan's first mural took shape on the side of an old fire station, a building that had long been overlooked by the townspeople. He chose a design that mirrored the theme of his original graffiti: resilience and growth. This time, however, he added elements that reflected the spirit of the town itself: a winding river symbolizing unity, a sunrise representing hope, and silhouettes of trees standing tall against a stormy sky. As the mural came together, passers-by began stopping to watch him work. Some offered words of encouragement. Others simply stood silently, marveling at how something so vibrant could emerge from something so neglected. One afternoon, as Ethan painted intricate details along the mural's edges, a young boy no older than 10 approached him cautiously. "Are you the guy who got in trouble for painting stuff?" the boy asked, his voice filled with curiosity rather than judgment. Ethan chuckled softly, setting down his brush. "Yeah, I guess I am," he admitted, crouching down to meet the boy at eye level. "But I'm trying to make things better now." The boy tilted his head thoughtfully. "It's really cool. My mom says people should care more about places like this." He gestured toward the fire station before adding shyly, "Maybe you can teach me how to draw someday." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "I'd like that," he said earnestly. "Art is for everyone, it just takes practice." Moments like these became frequent as Ethan worked on different sites around town. People who had initially dismissed him as a troublemaker started seeing him in a new light. Shop owners invited him inside for cold drinks during breaks. Elderly neighbors brought him homemade snacks, and local news outlets even featured short stories about his project. What had begun as a punishment was quickly turning into a source of pride, for Ethan and for the community. Judge Hargrove kept her promise to monitor his progress, visiting each site periodically to observe his work. At first, Ethan worried that her presence might feel intrusive or intimidating. But over time, he realized she wasn't there to criticize. She genuinely wanted to see how he was using this second chance. During one visit, as Ethan added finishing touches to a mural depicting hands planting seeds in fertile soil, the judge lingered longer than usual. "You've come a long way, Mr. Carter," she remarked, her tone softer than ever before. This is impressive." "Thank you, Your Honor," Ethan replied, surprised by the compliment. "I've learned a lot doing this, not just about art, but about responsibility, too." She nodded approvingly. "That's good to hear. You know, when I sentenced you to this project, I wasn't sure if you'd rise to the occasion." Many wouldn't have, but you've proven me wrong and yourself right. Her words struck a chord deep within Ethan. For so long he'd doubted his abilities, convinced that he didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Now, standing amidst colors and shapes that told stories of hope and renewal, he finally understood the power of persistence and belief, not just in himself but in the potential of others to change their perspectives. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan noticed subtle shifts in the way people interacted with the spaces he transformed. The park bench he decorated with floral patterns became a favorite spot for families to sit and chat. The library wall, once dull and gray, now attracted readers eager to pose for photos in front of its lively imagery. Even teenagers who had mocked him for getting caught began tagging along to help, inspired by the idea that they too could leave positive marks on the world. But perhaps the most profound change occurred within Ethan himself. Painting murals gave him a sense of purpose he'd never experienced before. Every completed piece reminded him that creativity wasn't just about expression, it was about connection. Through his art, he was bridging gaps between generations, backgrounds, and opinions. He was showing people that even the smallest acts of effort could spark meaningful conversations and inspire action. One evening, as Ethan packed up his supplies, after a long day of work, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had led him here. If someone had told him months ago that vandalism charges would lead to this moment, standing proudly beside murals that brightened his town, he never would have believed it. Yet here he was, surrounded by evidence of growth, not just in the buildings he'd touched, but in himself. The next morning, Ethan arrived early at his final project site, a dilapidated playground tucked away in a quiet corner of town. Overgrown, weeds choked the swings and rust ate away at the monkey bars. It was the perfect canvas for his last mural, a tribute to childhood wonder and imagination. As he sketched out his design, a fantastical scene of animals playing alongside children, he couldn't help but think about how far he'd come since that night at the abandoned factory. By mid-afternoon, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by word of Ethan's latest creation. Among them was Ms. Alvarez, who greeted him with a proud smile. "You've done incredible work, Ethan," she said warmly. "Not many people get the chance to turn their mistakes into something this meaningful." "Couldn't have done it without everyone's support," Ethan replied humbly. "And honestly, I didn't think anyone would believe in me after everything that happened." "Well, sometimes it takes a little faith to see what someone is capable of," she responded. "You've earned that faith, Ethan. Don't forget that." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the freshly painted mural, Ethan stepped back to admire his handiwork. Children laughed and played nearby, their laughter blending harmoniously with the chirping of birds overhead. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt truly seen, not as a troubled teen or a misunderstood artist, but as someone who mattered. Judge Hargrove appeared later that evening, surveying the finished mural with evident satisfaction. "You've exceeded expectations, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice tinged with admiration. "This town owes you gratitude, not just for beautifying these spaces, but for reminding us all of what's possible when we choose to create instead of destroy." Ethan swallowed hard, overwhelmed by her praise. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said quietly, "for giving me this chance. I won't take it for granted." With that, Judge Hargrove extended her hand, which Ethan shook firmly. In that moment, he realized something important. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it and finding ways to move forward. And though he still had much to learn, he knew one thing for certain. He was ready to face whatever came next, armed with brushes, colors, and an unshakable belief in the power of possibility. The final mural at the dilapidated playground marked not just the end of Ethan's community service hours, but also the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The once abandoned space, now alive with color and laughter, became a symbol of transformation, not only for the town, but for Ethan himself. As he packed up his brushes and paint cans on that last day, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of accomplishment. For months, he had poured his heart into this project, turning neglected spaces into vibrant works of art. Each stroke of paint had been more than just decoration. It was a reminder that even broken things could be made beautiful again. Word of Ethan's murals spread beyond the small town, catching the attention of local newspapers and social media platforms. Photos of his artwork began circulating online, accompanied by captions praising his creativity and resilience. People who had never met him shared stories about how his murals inspired them to see their own communities differently. One commenter wrote, "This kid didn't just paint walls, he painted hope." Another added, "If one teenager can make such a difference, imagine what we can all do if we try." Ethan found himself overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. At first, he struggled to reconcile the praise with the image of himself as a nervous boy standing in front of Judge Hargrove's bench. But as the messages kept coming, he realized something important. People weren't applauding him because he was perfect. They admired him because he had taken a mistake and turned it into something meaningful. That realization gave him confidence he hadn't known he possessed. One evening, shortly after completing his final mural, Ethan received an unexpected invitation. A local art gallery owner named Mrs. Harper reached out, asking if he'd like to showcase his work in an upcoming exhibition titled Art from Ashes: Stories of Resilience. The theme resonated deeply with Ethan, and though the idea of displaying his art in a professional setting terrified him, he accepted the offer. It felt like another step toward proving, to himself and others, that his voice mattered. Preparing. For the exhibition required long hours of planning and reflection. Ethan sifted through sketches, photographs, and notes from his time working on the murals, piecing together a collection that told his story. He included images of the abandoned factory where it all began, alongside photos of his completed projects around town. In the center of the display, he placed a large canvas depicting the tree breaking through concrete, the same image that had sparked his journey. Beneath it, he wrote a short message. Growth starts where you least expect it. Sometimes all it takes is believing in the possibility of change. On the night of the exhibition, Ethan stood nervously near the entrance of the gallery, watching as guests filed in. Many were familiar faces, neighbors, classmates, and shopkeepers who had cheered him on during his community service. Others were strangers drawn by curiosity or word of mouth. Among the attendees was Judge Hargrove, who greeted him with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "You've done remarkable work, Mr. Carter," she said, her tone filled with genuine pride. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating your talent. It's about recognizing the impact one person can have when they choose to create rather than destroy." Her words stayed with Ethan throughout the evening as he moved from group to group, answering questions and sharing his story. Some visitors asked about his inspiration. Others wanted to know how he managed to stay motivated despite criticism. To each question, Ethan responded honestly, speaking from the heart. By the end of the night, he realized that his journey wasn't just about personal redemption. It was about inspiring others to find beauty in their own struggles. As the weeks passed, Ethan's newfound confidence spilled over into other areas of his life. At school, he joined the art club, eager to share his skills with fellow students. Teachers noticed a change in him too. He participated more actively in class discussions and volunteered to lead projects. His parents marveled at the transformation, often remarking how proud they were of the young man he had become. But perhaps the most significant change occurred within Ethan himself. No longer did he see mistakes as failures or setbacks as insurmountable obstacles. Instead, he viewed them as opportunities to learn and grow. The boy who once doubted his worth now understood that imperfections were part of what made him unique and valuable. Months later, Ethan graduated high school, earning recognition not only for his academic achievements, but also for his contributions to the community. During his valedictorian speech, he reflected on the lessons he had learned along the way. "Mistakes don't define us," he told the audience. "It's what we do after those mistakes that truly matters. Every challenge is a chance to rebuild, to reimagine, and to rise stronger than before." After graduation, Ethan enrolled in a local college to study fine arts, determined to continue using his talents to make a difference. His dream was to travel to underserved communities, helping revitalize forgotten spaces through art. Along the way, he hoped to inspire others, especially young people, to believe in their ability to create positive change, no matter how daunting the odds might seem. Years later, when Ethan returned to his hometown as a successful artist and advocate, he visited the old factory that had started it all. The building still stood, its walls weathered but adorned with fresh murals created by aspiring artists inspired by his story. Standing there, surrounded by evidence of growth and renewal, Ethan smiled. He thought about the nervous teenager he used to be, the one who had trembled under Judge Hargrove's gaze and doubted his place in the world. That boy was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more hopeful. And yet, Ethan knew that without that boy, the one who dared to dream and risk failure, he wouldn't be where he was today. Growth, after all, always starts where you least expect it.